I'm extremely excited to announce a brand new sponsor for the Behind the Shield podcast, and that is Rescue One CBD. For any of you who have listened to this podcast for the last 8 years, you would have heard my own personal journey from using prescription pills after a knee surgery to finding CBD and having incredible success with that. Now, I'm sure everyone listening is fully aware that we have an epidemic when it comes to the use of nicotine pouches, dip, and other products. Now, to combat this, John from Rescue One has developed a nicotine-free pouch called the RIP pouch. It's the first and only pouch that contains CBG, nootropics, and B vitamins for both energy and mental clarity. And as with all of their products, is tested to ensure it is 0.000% THC free. So completely trusted for anyone in uniform, and they always send a drug test with their products just to give you guys peace of mind. Now, the pre-sale for this incredible product has just begun and goes on till October 1st. So if you go to rescue1cbd.com, you can register for the pre-sale and make sure it ships the moment it is available. Now, on top of all that, Rescue One is offering you, the listener of the Behind the Shield podcast, 15% off your order if you use the code BTS, as in Behind the Shield. And you can find all of their products, you can find all of the testing and understand why this truly is a product that you can trust by going to rescue1cbd.com. And you can listen to my conversation with John on episode 1011 of the Behind the Shield podcast. This episode is sponsored by Bubs Naturals, yet another company that I tracked down to bring on as a sponsor because I myself love their products. They are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a 20% discount. But before we get to that, I do want to highlight a few of the products that I use myself. Firstly, collagen. I am about to turn 50, and so my hair, my skin, my nails, not really a big concern when I was younger, definitely a lot more of a concern now. However, where I've really seen the impact is joint health and gut health, and have been blown away that when I'm consistent using collagen, Bubs collagen in this case, I see a massive improvement in both. Another area, I drink coffee, love coffee, and in the morning I use the Halo Creamer. Now originally I used the MCT oil powder, but now they have the Halo Creamer, which has also got grass-fed butter in it. A lot more creamy if you're not trying to go for the vegan option that they have as well. Now it's important to mention as well the altruistic element of Bubs Naturals. The origin story involves Glenn "Bub" Doherty, one of the 2 Navy SEALs killed in Benghazi, and a good friend of the founders, Shawn and TJ. So 10% of every single sale goes towards the Glenn Doherty Foundation. Now, as I mentioned before, they are offering you, the audience, 20% off your purchase if you use the code SHIELD. That's SHIELD at bubsnaturals.com. And finally, if you want to hear more about their products and Glenn's powerful story, listen to episode 558 with co-founder Shawn Lake. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Deputy Fire Chief of Operations for Washington, D.C. Fire and EMS, Shawn Downs. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from Shawn's journey into the fire service, 9/11, the insurrection, the tragic recent aviation accident, their 24/72 shift schedule, some incredible mental health and physical health wellness initiatives, violencing the workplace, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this podcast on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Shawn Downs. Enjoy. Well, Shawn, I want to start by saying thank you so much to Oak McCulloch, our mutual friend, for making this connection. And then I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
All right. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and it's really an honor that Oak thought enough of me to share my name with you.
Likewise. So let's very first question: where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
You are finding me at home in St. Mary's County, which is the southernmost county in Maryland, surrounded by water. A good way to decompress when you leave work.
Brilliant. I said this shows you how tired I am. We're going to talk about sleep deprivation. It is morning time here at the moment. I just said this afternoon. So there we go. All right. Well, let's start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay. So I was born right here in St. Mary's County at Leonardtown Hospital, and I currently live in Leonardtown, Maryland. So I haven't made it far. Um, I grew up in a broken home, if you will. My parents divorced when I was really young. And I think that's important because a lot of what I'm going to say about my childhood, I think, is very common amongst public safety individuals, police, fire, EMS, military, whatever the case may be. It's just this really weird thing that I've come to realize that a lot of us that had troubles growing up seemingly end up in careers where we're helping others. So I don't know if there's a connection there or not, but anyway. So my mom was just a general worker. She worked for a microfilm company for a while. She ran an in-home daycare for a while, things like that. My dad really never did anything. When I was growing up, he suffered from a lot of mental health issues, and he was just kind of in and out of my life, if you will. But I did have a couple of family members that were in the fire service, and my grandfather was a sheriff right here in the county that I grew up in. So there was that ounce of public safety connection. Though, if you would have asked me when I was younger if this is what I would end up doing, the answer would have been a hard no. My plan was after high school, I was going to go to Frostburg. I was going to play football. I was going to major in history, and I was going to come back and I was going to teach American history in high school. That's what I wanted to do. Um, that obviously did not happen. So, what ended up happening was um, in high school, I was headed that direction. Everything was going great until my senior year. My senior year of high school, my father ended up committing suicide. And the only thing I really remember about my dad is him always saying, "Hey, you should go in the Marine Corps. You should go in the Marine Corps. You'd make an awesome Marine," on and on and on. So I abandoned all college, everything, my hopes, my dreams, everything else. And I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps at 17 years old. And I spent about a minute and a half in the Marine Corps. My career was cut very short. Found myself back home, and I had been volunteering at the firehouse for a couple of years. In fact, I was living in the volunteer firehouse when I left for the Marine Corps. And I came back and I was working on Pax River Naval Air Station. I was testing aircraft as to how they react to electromagnetic waves and radar frequencies, it's a pretty cool thing if you ever look it up. You can shut an entire aircraft down mid-flight if you hit it with the right frequency at the right angle at the right time. And that's pretty scary, right? So it was a really interesting job. So another thing that happened there right out of high school and coming home was I ended up getting someone pregnant. It was my first child, obviously. At 19 years old, he was born, and life sped up really quickly. Still volunteering. By this point, I was an officer in the volunteer firehouse, but really still didn't have that deep burning desire to do it for a career. It was fun. I don't know. It didn't seem like something that um, I thought I wanted to do, which is odd, right? Like a lot of people that volunteer and a lot of people that grow up down here, they're chasing this dream, and that just wasn't a dream of mine. I just wanted to be successful. I didn't care what it was. I wanted to break the cycle of what I was born into, and I wanted to be successful. That all changed when DC opened up their hiring for the first time in 3 years. When I found that out, me and a buddy of mine rode up to the city the night before they were accepting applications, and we literally slept behind a firehouse. And we were number 80 and 81 in line. So it wasn't like we were the only ones doing this. Um, so lo and behold, submitted my application, took a written exam, and when the written exam results came back, I actually called DCHR asking if they made a mistake. I don't think that I'm dumb by any means, but to place 32, I think, out of over 3,000 people testing, like I was, no, that's not me. I'm sorry. But sure enough, they did not make a mistake. So I was in the first recruit class on that list. Again, still raising my oldest boy and everything else, still volunteering. Took a break from volunteering while I was in the academy and through my probation, of course. But I fell in love with it. I mean, honestly, I'll stop right here and say that my first day in the academy, we had to stand up and we had to say, why we're here, et cetera, et cetera. And I honestly remember saying, I'm here to provide the best life I can for my son. It wasn't, I'm here because this is a lifelong dream. It wasn't, I'm going to change the world or uh, this was an opportunity for me to enter into a career that I already really liked and I thought I could fall in love with. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, when I got hired, I had this plan, so to speak. I was going to make captain at some point in my career and I was going to retire a captain. Well, that's out the window because I made deputy chief with, I think, 18 years on, right? So everything else got compressed forward. And the reason it did is because I ended up falling in love with the job. I ended up falling in love with my city. I ended up falling in love with everything that the fire service truly is, especially in an urban environment like Washington, D.C. I cannot compare it to anywhere else I've ever seen. I know that all the time that I volunteered down here, cumulatively, you throw it together, it's 26 years. And I bet I do more in 1 year in Washington, D.C. than I have those 26 years combined down here. And there was something about that I just absolutely loved. Not to mention, you're protecting the nation's capital. And I really don't care at the end of the day what someone's political views are. I don't care what their world views are. I don't care. It's pretty awesome to work in Washington, D.C. and protect that city, right? No matter who's in the White House, it's pretty awesome. No matter who's in Congress, it's pretty awesome. There are highs, there are lows, but at the end of the day, you are the ones that are responsible for the 720,000 residents and the 1.5 million daytime population that comes into that city to work and or visit. Um, and I fell in love with it. Like I said, I rose up through the ranks really quick, became a sergeant with 7 years on the job, a lieutenant with 9, a captain with 11, a battalion chief with 15, and then a deputy at 18. I'm now at 22 and I'm a deputy and I'm perfectly content right there. Um, there's really only one more stop to make, and that's the assistant. But after 4 years of serving in the health and safety division and working Monday through Friday and doing all of that to be back in operations and shift work, I'm okay. 3 years to go, like I'm okay, right where I'm at. Um, so yeah, that pretty much covers like the career quickly. Now, a little bit personally about me through the years, I've collected some other kids. Somewhere along the way, I think I went to Toys R Us or something and just started picking them up. Um, but no, honestly, I did. I had 3 boys with my first wife. We went our separate ways back in 2012, and I met my wife now, and I've got 2 amazing stepkids. Unfortunately, one of them did pass away earlier this year. But he's still mine, whether he's here or not. Um, but my kids are all to the point now where they're spreading their wings. My biological oldest boy went to college, played football, did all those, majored in history. Really weird, right? Came back, was a history teacher, did it for 1 year, and decided that's not for him, but that's okay. He's still plugging along. The middle one is currently in the Army. He's stationed at Fort Drum, New York, in the 10th Mountain Division, and his dream is really rappelling out of helicopters or down the side of a mountain and going after bad guys. That's all he wants to do. And then the baby is he just graduated, so he's not a baby anymore, but he's my baby. Is working probably 55 hours a week right now. toying with the idea of maybe taking a couple of college classes, but he knows he does not want to go away to college. So yeah, then my daughter um, is doing great. She's 17. She's special needs as well. But we have a pretty active life still. I thought parenting was over at 18, and that's not the truth. That's when it gets really difficult, actually. So, all of you young parents out there that you've got 18 as your end goal, sorry, it's lifelong. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, my youngest, I've got a stepson who's 20, how old is he now? 24. And then my son with my first marriage is about to turn 18. So yeah, I can relate. I mean,
yeah.
it's not harder for those two, but yeah, it's a transition because now they're going from the child that you just tell them, "Hey, do this thing," and they do it, to you have to take a step back and this is another man now. So being that parent, being present for them is absolutely imperative, but the communication has to shift. You can't tell them what to do anymore.
Nope. And I think that that's the amazing thing about having three young men is they call me for advice, which is great. My oldest boy, when he was in college, more than one time called me saying he needed a ride home. He had a little bit too much to drink. So somewhere along the way, I got that right. My middle one, the one that's in the Army, is currently at Fort Polk in Louisiana doing some JRTC training for his first deployment. And this morning, 5:15 this morning, he texted me because they're getting ready to go out in the field for 2 weeks and he won't have his phone. And it was just, I love you, Pops. I'm going to miss you. I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
All the tragedies that you've mentioned, as far as losing your father, losing your sister, losing a child. I mean, these are just these kind of death by a thousand cuts, but I would argue obviously some of those were much larger cuts. But this ripple effect that you're worried about, from as you said, your father, your sister's side. It's interesting with epigenetics is that like with alcoholism, with some of these other things, that the neuroplasticity can occur if there is this kind of multi-generational trauma, and then one person grows up around alcoholism and they become an alcoholic, for example, and they think it's the same with depression, leading to these mental health crises. But I'm optimistic when you're worried about, you said yourself and your children, that when you identify that, when you do the work, when you're luckily empowered that you're living in 2025 and there are these solutions around that just simply weren't around 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think that's exactly how you change those genetics as well, because once you do your own healing, I truly believe that even your DNA starts changing.
I agree. I agree. And I think that another thing that helps me personally is the fact that I've latched onto psychology in general. While that's not what my degree is in, the majority of my electives, through the years, we're psychology based. My wife has a degree in psychology. Um, Obviously, the last 4 years in the district, that has been one of the biggest things that uh, myself, along with my team, worked on was building out our entire behavioral health program. And it's all for those things right there. It's teaching people to have this conversation right here and just talk about it, right? Like if I had cancer a couple years ago, skin cancer on my head. I, I talked about it. And it wasn't something that was fun to go through, but I talked about it because in case anyone else had something similar happening, they may go to a dermatologist and find out, what's going on. Same thing with the behavioral health, mental health aspect of life. I openly talk about it. And a lot of fire service leaders, I believe, are hesitant to, especially when they themselves are the ones that had to endure these things. But I think that what we're seeing now, as we're getting into, towards 2030, a whole new generation, a whole new decade, um, is we're seeing more and more open response to those types of conversations, and I'm going to keep having them. If I have them and somebody wants to weaponize it and use it against me, that's their problem. That's not mine. But if I'm having these conversations and I get through to one person and it causes them to speak to someone before they get to that point, or recognize the signs before it gets to that point, then I'm okay with that.
Well, this is what's interesting, going back to what you said about, the challenges you had when you were young leading you into uniform, and seeing that in so many of us is that absolutely is a thing. And our profession hasn't done a very good job of, for example, talking about the ACEs, the adverse childhood experience scores, where when you look at the research, a lot of first responders and military members have like 6 and above out of 10, as do a lot of incarcerated men and women. So those struggles can lead you, depending on the mentorship that you hit along the way, to a bad path, alcoholism, addiction, crime, etc. Or it can lead you into the military, the first responder, which may again lead you to those other bad ones later. But you're now wanting to be the protector. You're building an armor around yourself. You don't want people to feel the suffering that you felt. So they're for all the best reasons that we go into uniform. But having that conversation at the front door, saying there's a good chance that the reason you're here is because of stuff that happened when you were younger, in my opinion, rather than just doing a psych screen like an MMPI, which we all know now, or at least I know through all the psychologists and psychiatrists I've asked, was never meant to be a standalone test to deem someone ready to be a first responder, but instead saying, all right, well, we're going to do PT from day one. Let's do mental PT as well. Let's give you X amount of counseling sessions as you enter so that we can start working through whatever you brought into the job.
I agree. I think that we again, we as a service, I'm not going to say Washington, D.C., I'm just going to say we as a service, um, still are hesitant to accept exactly what you're saying, and that's what leads a lot of us to it. And when our people come in, we focus on all the things that they're going to see, and we talk about those things and all that. But you're right, I don't think that we address the elephant in the room, which is the baggage that they came on the job with. And then unfortunately, what ends up happening, and I've seen this, is that the cumulative stress of life and then everything that you're going through as someone with a badge on your chest, then when you break, the first thing that I've seen organizations say is, well, they came into this with these issues. Well, yeah, they did. That's why they came here to do the job in the first place. Let's not turn our back on them because of that. So, yeah, we still have a long way to go, I think.
Well, I think where the message is being completely mixed is, or distorted, should I say, is people have the impression that you, me, and another, 3,000 people are testing to this job, and we get down to where they do the screening, and they're like, all right, well, let's make sure that James and Shawn don't come in with issues, so we're going to do this screen. Versus switching the mentality completely, where you've done the background check, the physical, the written, the combat challenge, whatever it is. And now we're down to this. And okay, these are two recruits that have proven themselves to be worthy. Let's have this conversation where we are going to turn those struggles into strength, and that whole post-traumatic growth conversation, because it is very doom and gloom. Well, Shawn has had, this experience, and now he's struggling with depression, or James is, riddled with anxiety because of whatever, rather than, all right, you had some shit happen, but when we help find the tools that will work you through it, those struggles become strength. And now you become more resilient and more compassionate and empathetic in this job, and you'll become an asset because you've been through some shit. But the difference is giving people the tools and helping them work through it the same way as if someone comes in and they've got, a bit of a bum shoulder or back. You don't just, put them through something, break them, and say, right, sorry, you're out. You go, okay, let's do PT, let's do physical therapy, let's help you work through that injury. So now you're less likely to break. You're stronger than you ever were before.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right. Well, then you mentioned about, 26 years of volunteering. Talk to me about 9/11. That wasn't too far away from you, obviously. What was that day like through your eyes, and how did it impact your journey in the fire service?
So that's interesting because I shipped out for the Marine Corps September 11th of 2000, so year to the day. However, I was back home by September 11th of 2020, or excuse me, 2001. It was before I got hired on base, so I was volunteering. I think I was a lieutenant at the time, but I was working with my uncle-in-law at the time. And when the first tower hit, or when the first plane hit the first tower, he came out to the bay to get me. He was like, "Hey, man, you got to watch this." And I was standing there watching it when the second one hit. And my first thought was, I just wanted to be back in the Marine Corps. I wanted to go take care of whoever did this in a way that I probably shouldn't say on this podcast. And then as the rest of the events unfolded that day, I mean, we sat there, we were close enough to Andrews that we heard the F-16s take off when they were attempting to intercept what ended up being United Flight 93. Um, and it was just surreal. I mean, you could walk outside from the shop that I was working in, and you could see the smoke from the Pentagon. It was obviously a couple years before I came on the job in Washington D.C., but it doesn't mean that it affected me any less. Um, Back home at the volunteer firehouse, and then just in the community, I think one of the greatest things that I saw amongst all that tragedy was finally, America was starting to recognize what police, fire, military, and all do for this country. It was like the very first time that in my life I could recall. Um, I don't want to say us being heroes, right? Like, I don't want to be someone's hero. I just don't want you to chastise me for what I do or my guys or whatever the case may be. Um, and that was amazing. I think that rather I realized it at the time, subconsciously, that was the moment I began to say, this is what I want to do for my life. This is, the path that I want to go down. And again, 2 short years later, I was hired in DC, and the rest is history there. Um, but yeah, I still think back to that day. It's hard to believe it's been almost a quarter century ago. Um, I know I will personally never forget that. I will never forget what it meant. I do. It does break my heart to see the way the country has gone the last, 10 or 15 years with the seemingly hatred towards law enforcement. Thankfully, that has not spilled over into us. But obviously, there are a lot of people in this country that are anti-military still, and things of that nature. And I have to admit that it's heartbreaking. And while I don't long for another September 11th by any means, no stretch of the imagination, I do long for a day where America can come together like it did then, because I really think that's what America's about.
This is a conversation I've had with a few people recently, and I'm hoping we're talking grandiose plans now. I'm making my book into a show, and I hope this is one of the things that contributes to exactly that. We should not need a tragedy to bring us back together again. What we need is an awakening. An awakening happens when you've been given all these pigeonholes, and these people are black and these people are gay, or these people are cops, or, whatever it is. And then something catastrophic happens in multiple cities in the States, and you realize that you're all just humans. And you saw in 9/11, you saw 7/7 in London, the Grenfell fire, where mosques and temples and churches and, all these humans, all colors and creeds were coming together because they realized again that they were all American, they were all British, whatever the thing was. And I think this is, I believe, and this is my own personal opinion, that the kind of cracks are starting to show in the many areas that have divided us, the areas that span both political sides of the aisle, for example, the corruption in business, in, healthcare and all these different things. And I think people are starting to see it now. So I hope that the next time that we see these nations coming together, it isn't because of a tragedy, that we can get ahead of that and come together before another tragedy.
I agree wholeheartedly. And you said something in there that is one of my passions. It's one of the things, one of my talking points, I guess, anytime I have the opportunity to say this. And you said we're all human. And that's exactly it. No matter what your religious background is, no matter who you call God, or if you don't believe there's anything greater than you, at the end of the day, you can look at someone else and say, they're the exact same type of being as I am. What's it matter what they look like? Do you hate the orange and white cat, but love the brown and, I don't know, gray cat? Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're saying, right? Is because of someone's appearance or because of where they're from or because of who they choose to be in a relationship with that you're going to hate them. And I cannot get behind that on any level. Like I can never understand it in my heart, and it breaks my heart to see so much of it.
Absolutely. Well, I've said this so many times on here, an angry yet incurable optimist. And I believe that, you pull out aggressively the people that are the root of the problem. But, I do believe that that middle 80% is going to have an awakening now. There's going to be those two on the extremes, the 10% that, come hell or high water, will die on their sword for their favorite, political figure or whatever it is, racist cause. But the 80% in the middle, I believe, are really starting to have their eyes opened again. And I think there's going to be a revolution, but a non-violent revolution of kindness, compassion, and community. So I'm putting it out there. It's begun, and just we need everyone to believe.
I think in this country, it's going to be one of the two major political parties, or it's going to be a totally new party that comes in and aims for that 80%. Because I'm with you. I firmly believe 80% of the people in this country just want to love each other and just want to do a good job and just want, to chase that American dream. There are extremists in every aspect of life, whether it's religion, it's land, it's politics, whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying I'm not worried about those, but I am saying that we greatly outnumber them. And I just think that that is the answer. I believe that's what you're saying, is we just need something that is non-violent, non-catastrophic, non-whatever, just to unite us. And I think we'll be stronger than ever before.
Absolutely. Well, let's get back to your on ramp and to the career side then. So, now you're in charge of the wellness side. Obviously, you've got this great mental health initiative. We're going to talk about a lot of those things that you're doing today. Contrast that to the environment that you walked in. Obviously, different time. A lot of we just weren't talking about a lot of things. But what was the kind of fitness standards, mental health conversation when you entered at the beginning of this millennium?
Yeah, so I think when I got hired, um, I can honestly say we never spoke about mental health. We had critical incident stress management if you needed it, but really the only time that was even activated was catastrophic incidents, whether it was a line of duty death or something like that. We just didn't know, or we didn't want to admit it at least. When it came to fitness standards, I can say that when I came on the job, on average, the members of our organization were just overweight, some of them grossly overweight. I wasn't the skinniest when I came on the job. And again, like we just didn't press fitness. We definitely didn't press talking to each other, though I will go down one little rabbit hole and say that we did it. Um, and just there wasn't really this heavy emphasis in the service in general. I'm not picking on Washington, D.C. There wasn't this heavy emphasis on safety. What I think happened in the fire service is I think cancer is the thing that turned our minds on and engaged our minds. And what I mean by that is by the mid 2000s, 2005, 2008, I think it's beginning to become apparent to even the most hardcore, hard nosed, salty firefighter out there that, hey, there's probably a better way of doing this stuff after the fire. And I think that it was the all-in effort to attack cancer that opened our eyes to everything else, whether it was cardiac, physical fitness, mental health, all of these. Because once we started admitting that this is something that's killing our people, it became easier to admit that so was this, so was this, so was this. And the funny thing is it's not what you're running. It's not the incidents. By and large, the incidents we do a wonderful job of managing. I mean, we lose 100 firefighters every single year, and that is catastrophic and that's horrible. And I want to reduce those numbers. But statistically, that's not horrendous given the amount of incidents that we respond to. And I don't want to minimize any line of duty death by what I'm saying. What we failed and still fail in certain aspects to realize is how many we're killing all the other ways. Again, the physical fitness, so cardiac, cancer, mental health, etc. So in Washington, D.C., I think the tides began to change when the union began to really attack cancer and try to get us presumptive legislation. We had a few very, very outspoken individuals, thankfully, that were battling cancer around 2010, 2012, that just did not let up. They just kept, talking about it, forcing it, talking to the city council about it, obviously talking to the department about it. And eventually, um, we got presumptive legislation, which I think was the first piece of the puzzle. Oddly enough, that's about the same time I was a captain at the time that I got sent to the safety office. And my whole job when I went there, per the deputy chief at the time, was to create a cancer reduction slash prevention program. And we were able to do that for the first time. We were able to have classes on, what we're doing. And 90% of the issues still are after the fire's out, right? Like, I think we're pretty safe in putting the fire out. It's the dropping our guard after that. And it was, preaching wet decon on the scene. It was preaching clean gear. It was preaching taking a shower, though we still had certain hurdles. I mean, in 2016 in Washington, D.C., it was unheard of for a unit to go out of service following a fire so that they could get a shower. The thought process was, and what we had always told ourselves, we're way too busy to go out of service for something like that. The conversation that I ended up having with an assistant chief that ultimately helped me change that was I just asked him, hey, if we run a shooting, we have blood all over us. You let the guys go out of service to get a shower? And the answer is an unequivocal yes. Okay, if we run something and they're covered in vomit or feces or anything else, are they allowed to go out of service? Yes, that's disgusting. Then why can't they for something that we know is giving them cancer? And it was that phrase right there that began to change that aspect of it. Um, and I'm very proud of the fact that the entire division for the next couple of years hammered down on that. Um, Through all of that time, I was sent back out into operations. I was a captain at 15 Engine, ended up getting promoted to battalion chief, though they kept pulling me back to the safety office every so often on these projects. And then we'll fast forward to COVID. When COVID happened, I got pulled back to the safety office because they had basically decimated that entire division to lead or work on incident management teams across the city to deal with the pandemic. And during those times were when we really, really started to hammer down on cardiac conversations, fitness conversations, mental health conversations. By that point, we had O2X as our fitness component in the city. We had two physical trainers then for our 2,200 people, which obviously wasn't enough. Our people were showing that they wanted to be in better shape. They were the ones that were reaching out to O2X. They were the ones that were asking, hey, can you set me up with a diet plan or a workout plan or something like that? And we recognized all of that. So going through COVID, on the back end of all of that, we were working on policies and programs and things to institute as soon as we could. Thankfully, as the pandemic, went on, I ended up getting pulled back full time to that office, and then ended up getting promoted into the division head position, which is deputy fire chief of health and safety. And my fire chief told me, he was like, I don't care what it takes. I don't care how much it takes. We need to do something about these things. So you just tell me what you need and we'll make it happen. And by and large, he stood by his word. I can't really ever remember a time he told me no. There obviously were times where we didn't have money in the budget for a huge ask or something, but the answer's not no. It's just we need to work up to that. But in that time, right, I'm going to talk about simply from 2021 till now, we have, we've gone after post incident exposures by getting the N4's application so that our people can track their own exposures to the byproducts of combustion and or any other harmful substance on the scene of a call. Oh, and there's a mental health application within that, where every time they run a traumatic event or something, they can just simply log in saying they were here. They can choose to write a little blurb if they want. But God forbid, 10 years from now, when the person just, I don't want to say just runs another CPR call, but runs just another CPR call, but that's finally the straw that breaks the camel's back. The provider isn't looking at, well, it was just a CPR call. They're looking at these hundreds and hundreds of shootings and stabbings and infant CPRs and this and that and line of duty deaths or death of an active firefighter or whatever the case may be, that potentially, or we know, I'm not even going to say potentially, but all led up to that final straw being the one that broke the camel's back. Um, we enhanced our physical fitness program. Our people are now allowed to go out of service to work out. I mean, we have an understanding if there's a fire, if there's somebody not breathing, whatever, you hop back in and you go. But for the most part, our organization has done a phenomenal job of getting our people out of service so they can do those things. After a fire, we identify the units that were operating inside the structure and they're ordered to go out of service. They go back to the firehouse, they take a shower, they put on a clean uniform, they put their second set of gear in service. Um, all these things that are now common sense that were just unheard of a decade ago. Um, I mean, there's so much more. The behavioral health aspect of it. We hired a behavioral health coordinator a couple of years ago, and she has done a phenomenal job at working with our peer support team, which is almost 100 people, and providing services for our people. Uh, Never more was that prevalent than the airplane crash back in January. That's an incident that will stick with our members for the rest of their lives, and that was a multi-day incident. So it's not even like it was just one platoon that was affected by that. It was all four platoons plus day work individuals and everyone else, regional partners. But again, having our behavioral health program in place, having systems in place to get resources to our people quickly and then know to follow up on those. Like if you would have asked me, um, I don't know, 5 years ago, what's the best way to follow up after these traumatic events? I would have been like, oh, you just, you make a phone call, blah, 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 blah. I had no idea, the whole 3 weeks or 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. I didn't know that 30 days is about what it took to officially diagnose with someone with PTSD if they weren't beginning to show signs of vast improvement and things like that. Those are all things that she brought to our organization and brought to our attention and helped us realize, recognize, and put these programs in place. There's so much more, man. We've completely redesigned our personal protective equipment. I feel we have what is the absolute best available on the market right now for our people. We've redesigned apparatus to include 360-degree cameras. We have the Haas alert system in our apparatus, which has essentially net zeroed our responder crashes. We had uh, just a horrible couple of years where we had fire trucks and ambulances crashing in intersections. We found the Haas alert system. We worked with Corey Host and Haas to design something specific for us, which then now is available in any and all piece of apparatus. And he's in private vehicle manufacturers and everything now. But it has. We haven't had, knock on wood, one single apparatus on apparatus crash since we put those programs in place.
Would you explain the alert system for us?
Yep. So Haas Alert it's a device that basically takes millions and millions of measurements to determine, in every single piece of apparatus that has it, to determine the trajectory of where you're traveling and calculate the likelihood of you colliding if something doesn't change. And the way that it warns you is there's a blinking light right next to the driver. So the driver knows, hey, I need to slow down, really mind my P's and Q's, the whole nine. And what it does is it lets you know in all those blind intersections in a city like Washington, D.C., which almost every intersection is a blind intersection, that someone else is coming. And it again, it's so juvenile in the thought process. You would think somebody would have just thought about this, but it took Corey Host and Haas in doing that and having that vision and bringing it to reality. Um, I know just about every single organization in and around Washington, D.C. now is using the Haas system. Um, and again, I mean, that was us thinking outside the box, us finding a vendor, working with a vendor, tweaking a product that would fit us that ultimately ended up, again, being totally invaluable. Um, when the dust settles, here we are several years later. There are, man, there are so many things that I could talk about that we were able to do. Oh, here's one, the violence against responders tracking application. So we had a big issue a couple of years ago where one of our units was operating on the scene of a medical local, and someone that was high on PCP walked into the scene, became verbally abusive towards our responders, and then became physically abusive. So MPD was not on the scene yet. They had been requested, but they weren't there yet. We do not have police powers, but we did restrain the individual as best as we could to keep the incident from escalating. On the other side of that, being in the health and safety division and asking a lot of questions, we learned that really there weren't any protections in place for our firefighters in the district. I didn't know it at the time, but assault on our firefighters was at the time simple assault. It wasn't the same as assault on a police officer, which is crazy to me. Um, there was this general consensus that we can't leave a scene. We were there treating that patient, and this happened, that if we were to leave, that's patient abandonment. We were able to disprove that, right? Like that whole DSI scene safety thing doesn't change the moment that you enter the scene. It stays the same the entire scene. So we were able to educate our members on things that they could do. We were able to educate our members on the, I guess, the actual legality of leaving a scene if you absolutely have to. We were able to put a system in place where our members on the scene could document really quick via an application every time they were verbally, physically assaulted, and put in as much information as they want. And we've been able to identify, okay, well, in this battalion, during these hours, et cetera, there's a higher likelihood of that. So, what that can do for us eventually, we haven't done it yet, but we could increase the number of responders. Some of the things that it has done for us is it's allowed us to request MPD and their assistance in other ways. For us, a 1033 is our verbal signal that we need immediate police response. But like anything else, say a Mayday, if you suddenly change the fire service to say, "Hey, every time you got a priority message, say Mayday on the radio," then eventually our entire Mayday would just be another transmission, right? So we did not want to use 1033 15 times a day. So we just created a priority one response with MPD, and that's actually what gets used 90% of the time now. Very rarely do our people have to declare a 1033, but they do need MPD's assistance pretty regularly. So I'm sorry, I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain on everything that we were able to do. It just keeps going and going and going. And again, I mean, I have to give the fire chief all the credit in the world for anything that we took back to him, pretty much within reason, was just done. He was like, "Yep, make it happen, make it happen." We totally revamped our annual physical at the police and fire clinic to finally be 1582 compliant. That's something we have been working on since long before I first went to the safety office. So we're now actually, for the first time ever, as of last October, doing yearly physical fitness assessments. We're doing a much better behavioral health screening that's actually required in the standard. Um, our cancer screenings, we do every single one of them that is required in the standard now. And we're not done there. I'd like to continue to build on that, um, and go with things that are above the standard and beyond the standard. Um, but that was a huge win for the health and safety of our members. And really, I think I'm going to stop right there because I'm really racking my brain right now trying to think of all these things. But at the end of the day, that's what every single one of these programs or enhancements or whatever the case may be has been about. It's been about the safety of our members. And we've been intentional in getting in front of them and saying, look, we're not trying to put all these things in place to keep you from doing your job. We're putting these things in place to help you do your job more effectively by keeping you safer, by keeping you at work instead of increasing the likelihood of injury, by hopefully helping you live a long and prosperous retirement, not just get to retirement and then end up croaking 10 months later. Um, and I think on the whole, the organization is far better off, and I know our members are far better off because of it.
You mentioned about the PPE that you put in place. I just recently got in contact with a company. Actually, they approached me who are developing a probiotic that hopefully will remove PFAS from the human body. Obviously, that's a big topic now. And again, I want to give maximum thanks to Diane Cotter, who really has been the absolute fire spark plug when it comes to getting us in our profession to realize how bad this is. But anyway, they paid for me to have a blood test done. And normally when I get blood work of all the other things, the things that we're usually looking for, my blood work is usually pretty spot on. When it came back as far as the PFAS, and there's different kind of types within that spectrum, everything that registered was off the charts, like way, way off the charts, terrifyingly so. So this is a huge topic, I think, for us is it's, as you said, the prevention side. What are these pieces that we can manage? We can't manage what was in that building that is on fire, but we can manage what's in our gear. We can manage the decon after. So with the PPE, has that been a conversation? Is that something you've already put in place as far as a manufacturer that has the PFAS gear, free gear now?
So I think that where our organization and our bargaining unit and me personally, where we lie is we want to wait until there's a reliable product on the market that can do those things.
Right.
And unfortunately, I don't think that exists at the moment. And that's no knock on anyone that has it. We've worked hand in hand with both Steadfast and Gore in trying to how can I say this? Tell them eventually what the fire service needs. And I don't mean tell them as in we tell them what to do. I'm just saying that we have really good open relationships with both of those organizations. Both of those organizations are somewhere I could see myself ending up when this career is long over with. But I think that the timeliness of pushing a product without knowing what it was going to do is ultimately what has hindered our ability to do that. Segueing from that into back in April, I was invited to NFPA up in Boston, and I sat in a room with people that are far more intelligent than I. Obviously, Jeff Sturgis was in there, Brian Ormond. Oh God, what's Heather's last name? She's from another university in North Carolina. But there were PPE manufacturers, there were component manufacturers, there were fire service leaders, there were labor people, there were obviously research scientists. I mean, the entire conversation was about 1970 and all the changes to the gear and how the service was not going to meet it by the deadline in September. But obviously, PFAS was a large conversation of that as well. And I think that what I took out of that, more so than anything else, was the manufacturers are asking for the same thing that some of us in the fire service are asking for. And that's just, we're not asking to kick the ball down the field. We're just saying, hey, slow down just enough to get a quality product in our members' hands. Because the last thing we want is something that's going to protect our members even less, if that makes any sense to you. So that's where we are. It's something that we want to put in place. It's something that we want to do for our members, for ourselves. Um, but we don't want to be so quick to do it that we end up hurting other aspects of our job, because there's going to be a trade-off anytime you make any change to PPE.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting perspective. And it's one of the first times I've heard someone, that was really present in some of these conversations. And I think the perfect parallel is the COVID vaccine. There was rush, 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 rush. And, in that conversation, obviously, I think a lot of people didn't need it in the first place, but some people did. But the efficacy and, the safety of it was rushed through. And now, retrospectively, we're realizing that it didn't do the thing that, we were told initially that it did, as far as 100% efficacy and all these kind of things. So it is a good kind of side by side comparison. If you rush something through too fast, you might end up with something, as you alluded to, that actually makes things worse, not better.
Yeah, have you seen any of Brian Orman's stuff out of NC State regarding specifically the DWR finish on top of PPE and what that looked like on a firefighter's PPE ensemble prior to the removal of PFAS containing DWR, and then what it looks like now with like a wax-based? If you haven't, or if any of your listeners haven't, and they're a fire service leader, I would just ask them, beg them to go look at that. And you can choose to believe it, you can choose not to believe it. I sat on a committee with Professor Ormond and probably 100 other people prior to Professor Ormond writing his most recent paper, which caught a lot of flack from some of the fire service. And he didn't say one way or other in that article that PFAS isn't something we need to do. Removing it, meaning all he said was the same thing I'm saying, which is let's just do it scientifically, please. Because what he found was in his studies, and again, you can choose to believe it or not, but he found that not only water repelled better on the old stuff, right? Like that's something we all saw. Gear prior to 2018, 2021, depending on the manufacturer that began to remove it, would just beat up and run right down the outside of your turnout gear. And then with the newer DWR finish, it seems to soak in it like a paper towel, so to speak, right? Which, the first inclination is, well, it makes the gear heavier, which could lead to cardiac strain, et cetera. That's a concern, but that's not the biggest concern to me. To me, the biggest concern, if as water does that, what does oil, what does fuel, what does the simple hydrocarbons, the byproducts of combustion? And what he found was they were all doing the same thing. And the gear was basically soaking it up. And when Pyroman, which is what they utilize for their burn test, when they introduced a direct flame to that unwashed gear, it lit up like a dry Christmas tree, and it scared me to death. That's when, like, myself and the bargaining unit and leadership in our organization was like, hold on, wait, we cannot rush this one, because the last thing we need to do is put all that emphasis in our people, like, hey, every single time you run a car accident where there's fluids, you need to make sure you wash your gear. Or every time you do this, you need to make sure you wash your gear. We just felt like, hey, we want to wait until the science and the product catches up, and we're going to go after this. What we've done additionally to that to hopefully alleviate the PFAS, not alleviate it, but reduce it, is, we've preached not working out in PPE. We've preached not wearing it on calls that you don't specifically need it for. We issued winter coats to all of our members, fire and EMS, instead of them wearing turnout gear as a coat in the winter. We are still talking about a second style of PPE, something that's more in line with, say, tech rescue gear or something like that, to wear for flash protection, but doesn't have everything else in it. And you wouldn't really necessarily need that same amount of fire protection. So it being a little more absorbent probably doesn't harm you as much as if that were your PPE ensemble that you were exposing those things to. And I think my personal opinion, obviously, I can't tell any fire service leader what to do, but I think those types of conversations are really intelligent to have. Those things to look at are very smart right now. Science is going to move fast. We're going to have many options here really soon. I firmly believe that within the next couple of years. But definitely before you just put all your eggs in that basket, just do a little bit of research, please, and just see the trade-off. And again, like, I know it's very controversial for me to even say that, but it's something that I've walked through, I've seen, I've been a part of committees, I've been a part of these conversations, and I honestly, honestly, honestly believe that the best thing you can do right now is educate your members, think outside the box on ways to get them out of it, and work with these manufacturers as best as you can to get a reliable product to market.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective because that's a brand new, conversation now. It really is. I think another place that we've got to be wary of, knowing, the fuckery of some of these companies like DuPont, is also that they don't come out with a material like, okay, it's not PFAS and it's just a one molecule different and it does the same thing as well. So, that's another thing we've got to be careful on the science side, is that we're just not duped into thinking it's a safer product when it's not.
And I think Dr. Heather does a great job of that. And again, I wish I could remember which university. She might be at Duke. It's definitely in North Carolina. I do know that. And I think it is Duke now that I said that. But she talks about, bromide and all the other freaking chemicals and things, these compounds that are in our gear that 1970s calling to remove. But the trade-off there of what that does to gear, and then, okay, well, what if they just replace it with this? That's just as harmful. You just don't know it yet. And it's the exact same thing you're saying right there. And her message was the same. Like, when we're making these changes, we have to know to ask these questions. And I didn't realize I'd get so nerdy at this point in my life, but I'm really nerding out on a lot of this stuff because I want what is absolutely best for the fire service, even if it means it's going to take me 6 months longer to get there. Um, because I think that it's important to do it right one time, if that makes sense.
No, it does completely. It does. Now, when we're talking about carcinogens, the other, what I call herd of elephants in the room is shift work, sleep deprivation. I have been on this mission now I think it's pretty much since I started this podcast, or certainly close to it. We're trying to get people to realize that the work week that a lot of us work around the country, the 56, and now with this recruitment crisis that we're seeing, that becomes 80 plus hours a week. That is a massive, contributing factor to everything from the cancers to the suicides to the addictions to the divorces to all things that we struggle with. When we spoke a few weeks ago initially, you talked to me about not only the fact that you are doing 24/72 yourself, which is I think such an under discussed fire service conversation, and I've called them out. Our current union leadership work in a city that works 24/72. I've seen nothing as far as, right, let's make the rest of the country work the same. So talk to me about the history of the 24/72 in your department. And then what are you seeing, if you've had any ability to contrast with departments in your area that aren't working that proactive, healthy shift as far as health, ability to recruit, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as an organization, worked 3, 3, and 3 in the early to mid 80s. And that was 3 12-hour days, 3 12-hour nights, and then 3 days off. The mid to late 80s, we switched to a 24/48 with a Kelly. And then in the early 90s, we expanded the organization and picked up a fourth platoon based on, just the needs of the city, NFPA requirements of minimum staffing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we ended up, to the best of my knowledge, it was one of the first in the country, not the by any means, but one of the first in 1992 going to the 24/72. Now, for those first couple of years, from what I've been told, staffing was a little insane because it does take you a while to build up that staffing. There was a lot of overtime, there was a lot of other things. But really, after about 94 and 95, the department was fully staffed, and that's all we've ever known. So, what does that mean in comparison to other organizations? Well, we'll talk about right now in the staffing crisis. You and I spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. In Washington, D.C., we don't have one. And I don't mean to sound, um, how do I want to say this? I'm not bragging about that, but I am bragging about that, I guess. We have so many people that leave their agencies in and around Washington, D.C. to come to us, or Ohio, or New York, or wherever the case may be. And one of the first things that they say is the reason that they came was the 24/72, the pay. Then you get into well, it's Washington, D.C., or it's whatever, whatever. So, what does that mean to me? That means that, no knock on being a Washington, D.C. firefighter. I place a lot of pride in that. But it does mean that the people that are coming on the job are more concerned about the shift and the money than they are about exactly where they are. Um, I don't know if that's good, that's bad, but I know that for our organization that it's really good because again, when you hear some departments having to mandatory overtime people or having to do this or having to do that, like we're staffed right now at 102 or 103% of our agency, meaning we have extra bodies. That doesn't mean we work without overtime because there are so many various types of leave, whether it's sick leave, annual leave, paid family leave, whatever the case may be. We're always working some people overtime, but it's not against their will. We have not had the mandatory overtime someone, oh gosh, probably 2 years. And the last time we did was paramedics more so than anyone else. But we don't have those issues. And I can only attribute that to the three things: the schedule, the pay, and the fact that we're an urban fire department. It's like the perfect uh I guess setting.
One of the things I was going to ask you this as far as the other proactive initiatives that you've done, whether it's, like you said, everything from the PPP to the HAAS system. One of the things, sadly, that is the barrier to making this change, and I'll just, call a spade a spade. If it was simply the wellness of the fire service, this would have been changed decades ago. Because you look at, you talk about the numbers, that's the official numbers. That's not even the behind the curtain numbers of who we lose, whether it's buried because it was a suicide or an overdose, or whether it was, the other 80%, 90% of deaths, which is our retirees that don't get reported at all because there's no VA for the fire service. So the magnitude of this, physical and mental health crisis that we're in, is really kind of brushed under the carpet. So really, though, I mean, from a human point of view, that should have been enough, but it isn't. Let's just be completely honest. So then it comes down to dollars and cents. What have you seen as far as, the savings as you start doing these proactive solutions? I'm assuming there's no real way of seeing the 2472 specifically, but when you contrast it to the immense overtime budget, I'll give you a perfect example. LAFD over 3 years, their overtime budget was $1 billion with a B, 3 years. So, Apple, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out which system is going to be healthier and also more fiscally sound. But in all these proactive initiatives, have you been able to attach a dollar amount, as you mentioned, just intersection wrecks alone, the lawsuits and all these other things?
We sure have. So first and foremost, and the most obvious is what O2X does for our people. O2X produces us quarterly and annual reports on the overall cost savings. And the way that they figure that is utilizing our typical performance of duty, which is our workman's comp. We do it all in-house, so it's performance of duty, and sick leave usage compared year after year based on the number of people that they get, and the speed at which they get them back to work. So in a mechanic shop, you have different hours that are associated with a different service. Let's say a oil change is a half an hour. Let's say a brake job is 1.25 hours, and you had both of those done, and it's supposed to take 1 3/4 hours to do it. That's what the dealership's going to get paid, but it only took your mechanic a half hour to do it. So, basically you just got yourself an hour and a quarter back in profit, so to speak. Well, the same thing works with injuries. There are just generally accepted time frames. An ACL is 6 to 9 months. An Achilles is 9 to 12 months. A shoulder that doesn't require surgery may be 4 to 6 weeks, or whatever the case may be. So utilizing all those numbers coupled with an average of an hourly rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Last year, their report to us showed that they saved us $4.2 million on a contract that we pay $800,000 a year. So we netted 3.4 million in savings overall, which allowed us to spend that elsewhere that we didn't have to spend for these injuries and these time off things. So that's the most clear cut. It's hard to argue with. It's right there. It's in front of you. A second one that we've seen is some of the changes that we've done regarding the access to leave usage and things like that. We used to make it somewhat difficult for our people to get off for little nagging injuries. We would make them come to the police and fire clinic just to say, hey, my toe hurts today, like I can't go to work, or whatever the case may be. We have something called the minor illness program. We've drastically increased the amount of times that someone can utilize that. They just can't utilize it in succession. And we've seen about a third overall reduction in our number of performance of duty injuries. So I'm not saying that some people are fraudulent in claiming performance of duty, but I am saying that there is a direct correlation between allowing them access to utilize their own leave. They're paying for that leave, it's their leave, and now you don't have these mysterious 5 a.m. injuries when someone's lifting their gear bag that we used to have a lot of. So, I mean, little changes like that have been amazing to just see that increase. I'd have to say that our behavioral health stuff is on the other side of that. It's continuing to raise and continuing to go up. But I believe that is a direct result of the newness of it, the acceptance to be more open about it, which is causing more people to talk about it. And then some of these just catastrophic things that have happened in the city the last few years, rather it was January 6th and everything that went with that. It was the what do they call them now? They don't call them riots. They call them
Peaceful gatherings.
yeah, peaceful protest or whatever it is. So you can use whatever word you want to use. But those, the airplane crash, we've had a couple of deaths of active members. So I think all of those things add up to that on the behavioral health side. The good thing about the behavioral health side is, thankfully, and it breaks my heart to say that we have one, but thankfully there's been one in the past. I'm trying to think back, I want to say 7 years, that there isn't even a direct that they committed suicide. It's just it may have, it may haven't. So it's kind of questionable, but that's really good for Washington D.C. In any urban fire department. And I'm just going to stop right there. I want to say so much more, but it's a touchy subject. So yeah, I can 100% say that we have seen a positive budgetary work performance, just being at work, impact of these programs and these policies.
Yeah, I think this is the other thing that I'm realizing now, because this is a constant ongoing, metamorphosis of understanding and culture change and all these things. But when, for example, you have a department and they're like, oh my goodness, it's going to cost this many million to put in that fourth shift, the conversation needs to be one of two things. Firstly, what is your downstream annual wastage through overtime, lack of retention, workman's complaints, et cetera, which ends up being millions and millions and millions and millions, depending on the size of the city or the county. But secondly, it's an ownership piece. You didn't choose to go to a healthier work week 10, 20 years ago. And I'm talking about other departments. So this has got worse and worse and worse to the point that it's now a crisis, because there are literally departments in America that almost no one wants to work for anymore. So, we can genuinely put our hand on our heart and say there might be some departments that literally have to tell their city, sorry, we can't do this anymore. We don't have enough people. So to turn that around, and you were mentioning even, the recruitment struggles of law enforcement, and we at least have a decent public persona, a relationship with the public. But the poor law enforcement community have been vilified to where their recruitment crisis is as bad, if not worse. So if you are going to make proactive changes, yes, it's going to cost some money up front. You want to build a new school in your city, it's going to cost a lot of money up front. But then children are going to learn for decades after that. So I think this is an important thing. When O2X came to you, and I've had Adam and some of the guys on here before, great group of people, great mission. I know they're doing a lot of good in, with you and Boston and some of these other areas. There is a dollar amount attached to that initially, but you can't look at everything with a fiscal year view. You have to, as the saying that I always butcher, plant the seed of the tree under which the shade you'll never know. You've got to invest long term so that it's for your people and then for the people that you serve as well. So these proactive initiatives that you've taken, I'm sure the Haas system, again, had a large dollar amount up front, but what was the cost of all the lawsuits attached to all those wrecks prior? That's what's not happening now for years and years and years. So it's a really interesting perspective because a lot of our leadership have to develop that courage to go to their cities and counties and say, yes, I do need the money for X amount of people spread over the next 3 years to create this D shift. But let me show you where we're wasting money. That money wastage will stop. And now we'll actually be saving you money from year 3, 4, whatever it ends up being.
Yep, and I think that amortization is exactly what you're saying. That's necessary in any pragmatic change you're going to make in any business. School wise, I went completely outside of the fire service, and I have an MBA, so I think of things in dollar and cents. But I'm also a long-term investor. I don't own a single stock, right? Like, and that's on purpose because I believe that, small consistent increase over time will pay you a better return. Sometimes that means there's a large lump sum that I go and I put in, all to get a better return in the end. And that's the same thing that you need to think about when you're doing these programs. Like you said, Haas. I want to say our contract with Haas, don't quote me, but I want to say it's like $250,000 a year. If they prevent one wreck of two engines hitting each other, I mean, an engine right now is 1.25 million. So $2.5 million saved for $200,000 spent. You tell me, a great investment. Now, what if you had that this year, but you didn't have a wreck? Okay, great. Maybe the program worked, whatever, and yeah, you're down 200,000, but then next year you have two of them. Now you're back up, and that's the same way it works with these shifts. Even more so because it's the human body you're talking about. It's someone's livelihood. It's someone's health. It's all those things. I'm going to go completely off topic, but on topic, and say today's generation. I'm sorry, they place so when I'm not sorry. They place so much emphasis on their time and their time with their family and their time with their hobbies. That to them is a million times more important than a bigger paycheck or the prestige of this job or this title or whatever the case may be. And my kids, all three of them grew up around the fire service. None of them are showing really any interest in the fire service because they don't want to work 48, 56 hours a week and, all the other things that come along with it. So fire departments need to wake up and they need to start looking at all these things, as you're saying. They need to start thinking long term, not just savings, but long term. Like you said, are you going to be able to exist? Because people are leaving some of these organizations, like you said, in droves, and they're leaving them in really, really bad positions. And that's scary to think about if you're a resident of that area.
Absolutely. Well, I want to touch on a couple of, pretty career incidents that you've had in your city. And then you've kind of alluded to the fact that it did have a very, strong impact on your men and women. Let's start with January 6th. I've got a friend of mine who was Capitol Police at the time. I think he was in the dispatch area at that moment, but apolitically, removing politics from it as a first responder, that incident happens in your area, people are hurt, people are killed, and then because of the politicizing of it, I would argue there was a lot of moral injury from the fact that it was suppressed and downplayed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just kind of my perspective. Talk to me from a, DC fire and EMS response, what that day was like for you guys, and then the impact that had on your men and women.
So to best start that conversation, I'm going to start at the end and then go back to the beginning.
Please.
I'm going to go to January 7th. January 7th, I was at the training school and I was teaching our newest recruits. It was their first week. The risk management, cancer reduction, heart health, behavioral health class that I do for every single new recruit class. And in the middle of that conversation, the fire chief and a couple of members of the executive staff walked in. And of course, I gave the floor to them. And the fire chief began talking about the prior day, January 6th. And he began talking about how devastating that was to the city. And the correlation he gave was that our generation would remember that like the 68 riots. And I looked at him and I went, "Oh my God." And he was like, "What?" I was like, "Do you want to know how effed up I am?" He goes, "What do you mean?" I was like, "How effed up my head is and how just accepting I am to this being an urban environment, etc." January 6th, I was at work, and I have to admit, while it was unusual, it wasn't like it was unusual. Does that make sense?
It
And
does.
I don't mean to downplay the incident. It's just you're so used to chaos that chaos was accepted and that was not expected, but chaos is expected. And without educating myself further, I just chalked it up as a just another crazy day, you know. um so I had to work backwards from that. I had to start thinking like, how in the world did I get there mentally? And obviously it's the desensitization of, years and years and years of horrible things that you come across. But it's also a mindset that, we just should accept these things and we should expect these things when really, as a society, should we? No, we shouldn't, right? Like, we're not a third world country. We're the United States of America. Um, so with that particular incident, I'll go back to the summer before when we had the First Amendment activities, I think is what we referred to them as. And some of those nights were crazy. Some of those nights there were a couple buildings on fire in the same block, and I was an incident commander handling a couple of these things at the exact same time with the companies that I had, and we went through that for months. So again, that just became the norm, became what we did. You lead up to the days leading up to January 6th. We were on a little bit higher alert, just because of the contention in the country, so to speak, and us being the nation's capital where this vote was going to happen. We had Proud Boys in the city, we had Antifa, we had BLM, we had other just independent groups. And so we had a full incident management team in place. And I worked a few of those days, including January 5th, the night before, as the recon chief. So your job doing that is literally to ride around all downtown and just kind of finger on the pulse, see how things are going. And there were moments that night on January 5th where it got sketchy, I would say. Myself and my aide are sitting in the middle of the street, and you've got people from one group on one sidewalk, people from another group, and they're throwing things at each other, and they're yelling and they're screaming, and you're 1 second away from utter chaos. But again, like, it's just where we were, and in certain cases still are, which is scary. Not in our city, right? Like, we haven't had anything even remotely close to that since, thankfully. Um, but then you roll into the next day, and it was another work day. Like I said, for me, I was in the 4th Battalion, which means I was not near the Capitol. I had an entire battalion I was running. We had incidents we were running while that was going on. It took that conversation with the fire chief the next day for me to actually go back and review what happened and to try and see it from the general public side. And oh my goodness, I mean, we were so lucky as an agency that no one was hurt. None of our members were hurt physically. We had one chief that was inside the Capitol by themselves, just because that's how the IMT was broken down. He was the manager of that particular branch, and when things went crazy, he was still inside. So our guys had to find a way to get him safely outside. Our guys were dealing with calls all the way around the Capitol, inside and outside, for injuries, for this, for that. We had obviously the bombs that we were dealing with, a couple, well, bomb threats that we were dealing with a block away, and everything else. It was just utter chaos for our people. We, however, as an agency, I think, did a tremendous job following that event. We continued to check on our members. We stayed, just on top of that in a progressive manner, in a proactive manner. We were very transparent with our members. Anything and everything that we knew that we could say that wasn't, classified or anything, we shared with them. And on the whole, thankfully, I don't think I could chalk one lasting moral injury to that. I don't, to the best of my knowledge, no one separated from the agency as a result of that. To the best of my knowledge, no one has been inpatiented because of that. I'm sure, I would never know this, but I'm sure people have talked about it with our behavioral health people and our peer support and things like that. But again, I give a lot of credit to our agency for the way we responded to that and what we did. And I'm not knocking Capitol Police when I'm getting ready to say, but they've had 2 or 3 people commit suicide as a result of that. And again, I'm not saying that that's a result of what they did or didn't do. I'm just saying that thankfully we did not endure that.
Yeah, that's firstly, that I think is a testament to all the things that you've got in place when it comes to the mental health and the culture within your department to be able to talk about it. Because, depending on where you were that day, I'm sure your moral injury potential was either very large or completely disconnected. But I know, speaking to my Capitol Police friend, you have this happen, and then there's on a national stage, it's downplayed. It's almost denied. And these were real first responders. I mean, predominantly law enforcement in this case, that were hung out to dry, that were given no support. And then after it happened, oh, that didn't really happen. That was barely nothing. So I'm so glad to hear from on the fire and EMS side, there wasn't that big impact. But I mean, sadly, the suicides are clearly, one byproduct of a different entire culture that maybe didn't have that same kind of support. And certainly from the higher level nationally, that organizational betrayal. I mean, you put on that uniform every day to protect, you do your job, and then you get thrown under the bus at the end of it, which we all know, whatever your example is in your particular department, organizational betrayal can be a huge impact when it comes to mental health.
Absolutely, it can. And again, I think that our partners at the Capitol did the best that they could as an agency for their people. I think a lot of what you're saying holds a lot of weight. Gaslighting is real. And when you tell someone that something they experienced, that they didn't experience it, and then you get them twisting that inside their head to where they're questioning their own reality, just imagine what that ultimately leads to. And I'm not saying the Capitol Police themselves told their people it didn't happen, but society 100% did. The news, depending on which network you were looking at, definitely did. And again, I'm not going political with that. It is what it is. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
Again, me, right? Like I had blinders on. I had blinders on and I was there working that day. I just was, a, I guess, a few blocks too many north of where it occurred to have been drawn down in it. So it didn't hit me the same way it hit the chief that was stuck inside Capitol. Yeah, there's a great 1 hour video on YouTube if you ever want to watch it. Our agency did. It was all about the response to that. Chief Donnelly has a lot to say in it. Chief McCoy, who was our special operations deputy, he's now an assistant, had a lot to say about it. But it'll really show you from the fire department's perspective what that day was like. It's a really good video that we shot in house.
I'm gonna have to watch that. It's interesting how you kind of had that aha moment on the 7th. I think I wrote about this in one of my books. I'm sure I did. There was a moment kind of towards the end of my tenure at the second last department I was at. So we're talking Orange County, to, urban environment, Orlando, the bad side of Orlando, the part that the tourists don't see. And I think I had a late relief. So I went on this call, and it was for a body in a dumpster. And our medic at the time, Maria, she actually went and observed obvious signs of no obvious signs of life, caught it right there. And then we came back and we were talking about getting breakfast. And I kind of had this moment. I'm like, fucking hell. Like we literally went about our day. Well, there's this, if she was a sex worker. So this young woman is lying dead in this dumpster. and it didn't even raise an eyebrow to us. And it's not that we aren't compassionate, because I can tell you, everyone on scene that day was a good paramedic or EMT. They were full of compassion and empathy. But it was that dulling of the senses, like you said, when you're used to that kind of violence and tragedy year in, year out, your barometer becomes completely skewed. And at that moment, it was so normal that she checked, she came back, and we had this conversation about breakfast. And that was a real aha moment for me that kind of parallels what you're talking about.
And it's sad when that hits you, right? Like, at least it was for me, because I have a heart. I believe I'm a compassionate person. I would do anything in the world for anyone. And again, to sit there and look yourself in the mirror and say, man, I am this flawed because of this, that stings, you know? Um, but I think that's also important to have in work, right? Like, you have to have the to emotionally disconnect things in a moment when it comes back. I firmly believe that if you're not intentional about talking and you're not intentional about decompressing and purging that stuff that's accumulated in you, I feel bad for you when it breaks. I'll talk briefly about when it broke for me. In 2019, my oldest son, the oldest one, the one that just passed back in January, went through a series of seizures and just this uncharacteristic, like, shouldn't have lived situation. He was seizing for over 40 hours straight. Now, defining seizure, not they weren't all grand mal, just that constant erratic brain activity. It got to the point where the doctors at Johns Hopkins had told us, hey, you need to go ahead and say bye. Like, the only thing that we can do at this point is almost like a computer and do a hard reset. Like, they basically had to kill him in order to see what would happen. So my wife and I were standing in the corner of the room, and when they did that, and you heard that beep, and then you started watching them work him, it was like I easiest Saw movie or any other psychological thriller where I'm watching what I'm watching, and all I'm seeing are the hundreds and hundreds of incidents that I'd run through the years where CPR was involved or something, like that. Just weird stuff that I had no idea was still in my head. I mean, I was seeing kids, I was seeing old people, I was seeing people in car wrecks, I was seeing people that had pulled out of buildings. I mean, just everything. And after about 5 minutes, I couldn't take it. I went out in the hall and I called one of my fire service mentors. I actually called him Pops. And I was like, dude, I'm so jacked up. And I wasn't saying that. I was saying a lot more, I guess, aggressive words. And he calmed me down. He's like, what is going on? And I told him, and he went, dude, you need to stop. And I was like, what? He goes, you were doing your f***ing job. You know what I mean? Like, if you couldn't do your job in those moments, blah, 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 blah. And he was right. Right? Like, every single one of those moments, every single one of those events, everything that came back, I was doing my job, and I couldn't be overly emotional. I definitely couldn't be like I was there in that room. I had a job to do. But on the other side of that, I didn't do my job. I didn't get it off my chest because I didn't even realize it was there, you know? And that's the scary part about mental health and everything in the fire service in general is we all say, well, this is what we do every day and this and that and the other. It doesn't affect me again until it does. We had a retired member just about a year ago now, I guess. Um, he had been retired for, we'll say, 5 years. It was like 5 to 8 years, somewhere in there. And he sat at the breakfast table. He was talking to his wife, and his wife got up and walked away, and he picked up a gun and he committed suicide. And I don't know his personal life. I don't know what led to that. But my heart breaks to think that maybe years and years and years of the trauma, maybe he just never accepted the need to talk about that. And that's gut wrenching.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. This is the conversation we've got to have, as I alluded to. When we look at the statistics, even, we're not including all of the men and women that transition out at the age where most of these things are going to manifest. The cancers, the heart diseases, all the real, impacts of our job. But the other problem is, as we talk, let's talk about him when he was a young man. There was probably, a series of events and struggles when he was younger that sent him into uniform in the first place. That was pushed down because they weren't talking about it then. then you've got this whole, 20 plus year career in a time where also, masculinity is, again, suck it up, don't show any emotion, bury it down. And now, you're with this crew, though. It's healing for you. You love what you do. So you've got this identity, this purpose, this tribe. And then one day you don't, and your ID doesn't work, and the bay doors, are closed now for you. And now you're in an apartment on your own, and, or, whatever the example is. And that, more often than not, is when these people are going to start struggling, because everything that they did kind of build around themselves is stripped. And if you're not talking about that, that's when it's all going to rear its ugly head. And a quote I say a lot on here, Mexican proverb, they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. So you can push it down all day long, but eventually it's going to rear its ugly head.
Oh, it will. And I remind people, I'll say the non-believers, right? Because we still have them. We still have them in our agency, the people that, oh man, whatever, get away from me with that stuff. And I tell them all the time, man, look, I'm 100% thankful that you haven't had to deal with some kind of mental health issue, some kind of breakdown, whatever the case may be. But I'm also pretty certain that it's coming, right? Like I don't think you can make it through a career like this completely unscathed. And I just hope that when it does come, you find a healthy way of dealing with it. And then I just kind of leave it there, right? Plant another seed for them, maybe. But it is something that we really, really need to look at. I mean, one of the things that we are working on in health and safety with our retired Firefighters Association is identifying types of cancers, coupling that with time off the job. Our is the average diagnosis for skin cancer 3 years when they're retiring, you know what I mean? And going back to that conversation of, well, then we need to be covering our retirees for a period of 10 years or whatever the case may be with presumptive legislation. The same thing goes with the behavioral health. We've got peer support in place for our people, but our retired people can call them as well. And I think that's amazing. That's something that we offer to our retirees. I would love to see, and I don't know that it'll happen before I'm eligible to retire, but I would love to see the day where we have our own behavioral health center in Washington, D.C. Fire Department, where it's our own providers, it's our own people that are trauma informed, have a public service kind of specialty. And when that comes to fruition, the dream is that, again, it's for active and retired members. People think I'm crazy when I say I think that a place like that should have a basketball court, maybe some pool tables and this. Think like an FOP on steroids, so to speak. And people are like, why? I'm like, because these retired people are used to being in a firehouse. They're used to being around people that know what they've been through and things like that. And maybe, just maybe, having somewhere to go and just hang out with the people that you used to work out with or work with, maybe that helps. I don't know. But I don't think it's a bad idea.
No, it reminds me of Friends of Firefighters in New York. It's an old firehouse. So there's counseling and all kinds of other stuff, but there's, a kitchen. I'm sure there's a pool table. There's all the things that you would find in a firehouse, so that when these retirees come, immediately they already feel at ease. It's interesting as well what you were saying about, watching your son being worked. This was well over a year ago now. I was on a flight, or literally on the plane, getting ready to go on a flight back to the US from England when I was over there, and I was on the tarmac at Heathrow, and had my little noise canceling headphones on. I'm looking straight ahead, and then we all know that look when other people are looking at something. You're like, oh shit, something's going down behind me. So I took my headphones off, and the last passenger had shuffled his way on. The doors already closed, and he just keeled over. So unlike these stories that you see where there's 20 cardiologists on the plane, there was no one that had pre-hospital experience except me. Now, don't get me wrong, there were some good Samaritans that at least knew CPR, and then the stewardesses in this particular example had been trained on the oh my god, what's it called? Not the kaleidoscope. I forget now. But anyway, one of the BLS airways that they had. It'll come to me in a second. So anyway, but I end up having to lead this code, and I'm a passenger. So we start off with the people that are there. Then eventually London Fire Brigade get on. They help. We drag the gentleman into the galley. We keep working him. Then London Ambulance get on because those are two separate services, and that's when the real ALS interventions begin. And the poor cabin crew, I mean, they had to ask permission for the BVM, for the AED. So they're trying to get this equipment for us, but it's taken them a while to even get it. It's in the, like I said, in the aisle. So, not the teamwork and the ability to be efficient that you'd have in a trained EMS crew, for example. So anyway, point being, we get in there, and it's right when he goes down, he's got that look that we all know, okay, that we're not going to save this code. And I'm a black cloud anyway, like I'm the Grim Reaper when it comes to cardiac arrest. But even to me, there was like, this guy, whatever's inside is just, it's irreparable. But we work him, I'm still doing compressions. The paramedics get the advanced airway. I rotate off the chest finally, say, hey, is anything else you need me to do right now? And they have plenty of people in a small space. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go to my seat then. And they go, yeah, okay, we'll come find you when we're done. So I go wash my hands in the airplane toilets. I mean, there was blood in the code too. So wash the blood off my hands and I just go sit back down. And it hit me. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? As you said, this is what we do every day. And I transitioned out for, oh my goodness, 5 years by that point. So I hadn't worked a code in a while. But then I was like, oh, this is how you're supposed to feel when someone dies. And it was such a jarring moment, kind of like yours had. And it ended up being good because the crew was so shook. And some of them went home right there and then. And then the rest, kudos to them, carried on doing their job. They took off, and it was an 8.5-hour flight back to the US, and they served the passengers. But I ended up talking, they actually upgraded me. So I ended up being right where they all were and ended up talking to them pretty much the whole flight, making sure they were okay. But it was just to underline what you said. What we do at work and how we react to it is not normal. And we should be moved. Now, of course, you can't be moved by every single one and constantly be, processing it, but it will build up to the point where if you're not offloading it, you become numb to this. And then one code one day will be that straw that broke the camel's back. So realizing that you are supposed to feel after you fight to save someone and they die anyway, giving yourself that grace and compassion is imperative. So I want to hit one more area and then we'll go to some closing questions so I can let you go. You also alluded to, another large incident, which was that absolute tragedy with the military helicopter and the plane over your city. So again, if you want to kind of talk about that day, how it unfolded, and then the ripple effect of that on your men and women.
So I'm gonna actually start that by being even more transparent than I've been so far, and I've been completely transparent. But I didn't even know it happened. My son had just passed like 4 days before that. So I was off, and I mean off, obviously. And my organization did such a wonderful job of honoring that. Here I am, the deputy chief of health and safety. All behavioral health stuff is under me. All of that is all under me. And I didn't even get a phone call that night. I woke up the next morning to probably 15 texts from friends of mine across the country. Oh my God, my thoughts and prayers are with your guys. I'm like, what the heck happened? So it took me till the next morning to even know what happened. But of course, I hopped right on the phone and I started calling just to make sure things were going the way they were. Here's what I learned. The night that it occurred, our men and women did the same thing that you're saying. They hopped right into action. We recently got a dive team barely a year ago. So having them in place was amazing. The ground units that were there at the casualty collection points, amazing. But in talking to some of those people over the next couple of weeks, you really find out what they were thinking without realizing they were thinking it. For instance, I've heard stories of people that were sitting there and they're pulling body parts out and they're doing this and they're doing that, and they're hearing cell phones ring, right? Because everybody that's right across the river at the airport's calling their loved one, and they see a suitcase float by with a little um, ice skating figurine on it. And you know that's one of the kids, right? Um, I heard stories from people where there wasn't a single whole body that they pulled out. It was an arm here, a leg there, some sort of flesh here. Um, I heard stories of, just utter, utter devastation, but none of our people ever stopped. There wasn't one single person. Rather, it was the night the event happened, the next morning, which was just as bad because now the sun's up and you're really starting to see the remnants of it. Or for the several days following that, I want to say it was 6 days total before they got the fuselage out of the water. Um, we never had one person show up on that scene and say, "Hey, I can't do this" or whatever. Every single one of them did it. One of the big things that we did was initially we called in as many resources as we could from the surrounding areas. We reached out to the international. They had people from all over the country fly in, peer support wise, but we knew we needed something much larger than that. So we had psychologists and psychiatrists and behavioral health therapists and things from the region come to the city for our people. We set up a standalone temporary behavioral health center where our people could go for weeks and weeks and weeks following that. Um, when the dust settled, to the best of my knowledge, I think we had 7 total people that went off for more than 48 hours. We gave everyone that was there the option for 48 hours, so just kind of like decompressing time. The majority of them didn't even take that, some did. We had 7 people beyond that that stayed off for a little longer or whatever for lingering effects of it, but not one person has separated from the job as a result. Now, that's not to say that a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we won't, but we're not finished processing that either. We're still talking about it. We're still working on after action reports. There's an after action report operationally, but there's also a behavioral health after action report in phases. Phase 1 was the initial response to it in the few days thereafter. Phase 2 was from the day that we stopped working the scene until 30 days after, that whole PTSD window. And then phase 3 is from then forever. And that phase 3 after action report is going to make recommendations to the agency and to the city council again on things like this standalone behavioral health center and other things that we recognized we needed that we just didn't have. You know, I, I can't imagine the devastation that they saw that night. There's still a part of me that, in the craziest of ways, feels bad that I was going through what I was going through and I wasn't able to go. Um, and I think that that's just that desire to want to help, that desire to want to be there. I wouldn't have made a single difference with any of the lives that were in the water. I know that. But the lives of my men and women, just knowing that they knew I was there, that kind of stings. But at the same time, I know my life was pretty messed up at the time too, and I was where I needed to be. Um, but yeah, I mean, I go to a lot of firehouses now, day in and day out. I talk to a lot of our members, obviously my battalion chiefs that are under me and some of their officers below them. But when I walk into a firehouse, yeah, I have a conversation just like this, from the newest rookie all the way up through the most senior person on the job in that particular firehouse. And I have to say that in the past 2 or 3 months, I haven't even heard one person reference it. And I don't want to say that as it wasn't important. I don't want to say that as it wasn't catastrophic, because I'm sure it stings every single one of us, our hearts, the way it did when it initially happened. What I am saying is that it's a testament to the resiliency of our members and how they have the ability to go through something like that, to hopefully reach out to the resources that are in place to help them process this stuff. And here we are 7 months later, and by and whole, by and large, they're doing very, very well.
Well, I think again that is a testimony, as you said, to all the resources that are in place, but also to the 24/72. The rest and recovery that's needed to allow the brain to process that, and the conversations about what do we bring into the job? Because this is the mistake I think that we make in the fire service is, when it comes to mental health, they would point to that incident. This is why you're struggling. Well, what if they had, all kinds of death by 1,000 cut calls prior to that? They had X, Y, and Z happen when they were children. There's all these compounding factors. So the more we can kind of work on all those pieces, the more resilient the people become. And I'm a huge believer in post-traumatic growth, in forging resilience by going through these struggles. And even an acute event like that, the ability to work through it through ample rest and recovery, through no barrier to access when it comes to mental health counseling, fitness, all the positive outlets, a culture of community, so you're not having that kind of toxic environment. I mean, these are all such powerful pieces. And what you're talking about is, it sounds like all that preemptive, proactive investment that we've talked about for the last almost 2 hours now factored into the success of the men and women that responded heroically and their ability to process it after.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that that's, again, that 48 hours, that's something that is kind of unheard of in our agency. Our behavioral health coordinator can give 24 hours for extreme events, but we fought for more time there because we recognized that right there, that need to decompress. That would have given someone 12 days, which is a good amount of time to spend with your loved ones and to do those things that you need to do to emotionally kind of um, uncharged from that. And again, I think that all those things, like you just said, played a role in the success so far mentally in the members on our, in our organization dealing with that. The one thing that you've talked about time and time and time again that I wish the fire service would truly embrace is cumulative stress. Sarah Janke talks about it all the time. Sarah's a really good pal of mine. And I talk to fire service leaders all the time across this nation that, like you just said, they look for this one catastrophic event, and that's what they hang their hat on. They don't realize that it's that death by 1,000 cuts, like you said, that get the majority of our people. Um, our own police and fire clinic in Washington, D.C., I'm still working with them to try and understand that that is a real thing in our line of work. Now, I'm not knocking them by any means, but I am saying that they too try to look for this big event. Well, you weren't on this, you weren't on that. Why in the world are you broken down now? You ran that 64-year-old CPR. Yeah, I did. But that's also, like I said an hour and a half ago, the 1,000th time I've run that. Oh, and I'm dealing with coming out of my grandmother's hospice stay, and that woman looked just like my grandmother, whatever the case may be. Like, who are we to say what should or shouldn't break someone? Who are we to just to tell someone what their breaking point should be? What if we could just embrace the fact that we're all human, we're all individuals, we come to this job with a million and one scars from throughout our life anyway, and this job will scar you more, and everyone has a different breaking point. And I think that that's very important for fire service leaders to hear nationwide, that you cannot have a list of, well, these types of events qualify for, a performance of duty or workman's comp mental health breakdown. That take that idea and shove it where the sun doesn't shine, because everyone's different. Everyone's resiliency is different. Gosh, I mean, me. We talked about some of the stuff that I went through, and we didn't talk about everything I went through as a kid. And one of the first conversations I had with my therapist, she literally had tears in her eyes. And I'm like, what is going on? She's like, how are you standing? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I've got people in here that completely break down because, their husband didn't fill up the car. Now, again, I'm being facetious there, but, like, what in the world? And again, it's resiliency, right? It's life has made me as an individual have to be this way in order to survive. That's the same with every single one of us, and every single one of us have a different breaking point, and it is okay when someone breaks because of something that is so seemingly normal. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, even if you want to just use the musculoskeletal injury, model for a moment, I've had Stuart McGill on the show, the back mechanic they call him, and we're going back to the shift work and lack of recovery now. But he was like, oh, it's not if you'll break. If you're not sleeping every third day, or even less than that with overtime, he said, that's when you repair. So if you're an aggressive firefighter and you lift weights and you train, it's just, where's the weak link? So again, like you said, oh, I pulled my shoulder picking up my bunker gear. Yeah, because you were at, 99% likelihood of getting hurt by that point, and that was the final straw. So whether it's in the mind or in the body, it's the cumulative events, and then equally and oppositely, the lack of ability to rest and recover, whether it's healing tendons, ligaments, or muscles, or whether it's simply allowing the brain to process a trauma and forge that resilience in the first place.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. I think I'm right now the walking example of that. I literally just had someone I haven't seen in a few months. I ran into him the other day at work, and he was like, "Oh my God, dude, you're beefing up, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've gained about 15 pounds since the last week of April." He's like, "What in the world?" I'm like, "Dude, I can actually lift and sleep now. Day work, I live an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes from the city. So an 8 hour day plus that travel time. Oh, and I always like getting to work early. So I was at work at 5:30 in the morning, means that Monday morning through Friday morning, every single week for 4 years, I was getting up at 3 a.m. and I was going to bed about 10. So Monday through Friday for 4 years, at about 5 hours a night that I was getting. And that's if something didn't wake me up and if all the stars aligned perfectly. And I didn't even realize it, how much all of my weight training and everything else in the gym, like I was just spinning my wheels, so to speak. Went back to shift work, working once every fourth day, and thankfully I'm in a role that uh, at nighttime, I mean, I supervise the entire city for 24 hours at a time. So that means at night when I finally do try to lay down, other than waking up to listen to boxes and things like that, like I do get to sleep a little bit. And then on my days off, like I sleep like a baby all 3 nights now. I haven't really changed anything in the gym. I haven't changed what I'm eating, but here I am 4 months later, and I've put 15 pounds of size back on, and not bad size. Like there's a direct correlation right there that I can 100% say I living proof of.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I want to go to some quick closing questions if you've got time. All right. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Hmm. Yes. I just cannot think of the title. It's the one that Todd LeDuc from LifeScan wrote, but it is probably one of the best books I've ever read that has to do with everything related to the health and safety of firefighters. It's broken down into chapters. There's chapters on fitness, there's chapters on cardiology, there's chapters on behavioral health, there's chapters on annual physicals, blood work, et cetera, et cetera. But I think every fire service leader out there that has never found themselves in the space that I found myself in the past decade in, the safety office and then risk management, health and safety, all of that. I think you should read it. It's a pretty quick read, but I think it'll open your eyes to a lot of things that you probably don't even recognize or realize are out there. Another one is almost anything by Jocko. I'm a big leadership guy. I'm a big, lead from the front kind of guy. I absolutely love everything he did. Obviously, Oak's book is another leadership book. The big takeaway from Oak's book is essentially he would not do anything or not order anyone to do something that he wouldn't do himself. Now, there are a lot of other things in his book, but that's probably the biggest thing I got out of him. Um, Let me think. Trying to think of all the books that are sitting on my shelf. Um, yeah, I'll stop right there. That'll be okay.
Absolutely. What about films and documentaries?
Ah, I would say documentaries wise, I personally watch a lot of military, again, leadership documentaries. I watch a lot of documentaries in the fire service space, rather it's looking at the way this agency's doing this, it's looking like that. YouTube is like my life. I search almost anything and everything on YouTube, and I just watch documentary after documentary. There aren't any that stand out as in like, hey, you need to watch this one, but it's just what has worked for me, and it has really opened my eyes. Um, Movie wise, I'm not really a big movie guy, so I don't know.
You just reminded me, one of the best fire service documentaries I've ever seen. I think it was called Inside the Fire. And if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the safety organizations, I think, that put it together, but it was on the History Channel, and I've got it somewhere on DVD. But it was volunteer, kind of paid on call, and then career. And one of the career firefighters I remember was a black female firefighter from DC. And what made it so good was, you saw that no matter whether it was someone who just did it, if the bell went out off in their town, and they're doing, chicken dinners to raise money for apparatus, or whether it was, an urban environment like DC, that they were all the same person, with the same calling in their heart. I remember the volunteer guy saying every time a firefighter crosses the threshold of a burning building, they're taking the same risk. And that always stayed with me. Whether you're paid, whether you're part-time, whether you're, volunteer, with all this kind of looking down your nose at different groups of firefighters or different countries even, every single time that we break the threshold, man or woman, we are taking the same risk that, that we will sacrifice possibly even our life to try and get to someone. Beautiful. All right. Well, then the next question, is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest?
Mark, M-A-R-C, Cruz. He is, oh gosh, he's going to kill me if I get this wrong. I want to say it's Houston. It is a city in Texas. I want to say it's Houston. If it's not, he's going to body slam me for this. Mark is a huge proponent of everything, obviously, in the behavioral health space. That's what he does. But one of his big things he talks about is what you've continued to talk about today, and that's sleep, 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 sleep. One of the things that his organization did that I think is amazing for their people is they went to noon relief times. They work a 24-hour shift, but their shift change is at noon, not 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning. And when I initially heard it, I'm like, you're crazy, blah, 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 blah. But think about it. Then you only have one night. Doesn't matter if you're 24/48, 24/72. We'll just talk about 24/72 if my agency did this. Even though our relief time is at 7 a.m., the majority of us relieve by 5 or 5:30. The majority of us live more than an hour away from the city. So that means you're leaving home at 4 or 4:30, which means you're up at 3:30 or whatever the case may be. So your night before work, let's say you went to bed at 9 or 10, you're up at 3:30. Now you're probably up for the better part of 24 plus hours. You come home, you're up all that next day, the whole nine until you find, and that's without overtime, a second job, a family, whatever the case may be. If you went to that noon relief and your idea of early relief was 10:30 or 11, at least you got your normal night's sleep before your shift. You know what I mean? Then you work through the afternoon and into the evening, you go to sleep. You don't need to be up again at 5 o'clock in the morning. If you're not in an incident, you sleep. They don't chase people out of bed till 8 or 8:30. Just enough time to clean up the firehouse, eat, and their relief is there. And I'm telling you, people look at me like I'm crazy when I mention it, but I really think there is something there that he's doing that he can quantify and show you the results of what they've done. And I I think personally that is the future of the fire service. When we talk about health and safety and we talk about all those things, a small change like that, I think, could go a long way with the sleep of our firefighters.
I couldn't agree more. I've actually talked about that a lot recently. I think it might have even been Sarah that really put that idea in my head.
Sarah and Mark are one and the same. They're. I mean, I've got them both on speed dial in this phone. I love them both. They teach together all the time, side by side. Typically, if I'm in their class, I'm picking on both of them. But yeah.
Yeah, it is. And then when I think about, because I was, 14 years, I usually lived about 70 miles away from the station. So I was, commuting into an urban setting, so again, I'm getting up at 5 a.m, so then when you kind of take a step back, like, okay, so the first day we're already sleep deprived before we've done anything. I also then recently kind of looked back and was like, on the 24/48 schedule, I only spent 1 out of every 3 mornings with my family. The first day I'm awake and gone before they wake up. The second day, again, 70-mile commute. They're already at work and school by the time I get home. The third day is the only day I actually see them in the morning. So by switching to the noon schedule, the ongoing shift wakes up at a normal time, has breakfast with their family, takes the kids to school, kiss the partner goodbye, and they go off to work. And then they go to the station, off going exactly like you've alluded to. They get their ass handed to them at night. Now they get to sleep. And that's how Anaheim was. We took the gear off our who we were relieving, so they could just stay and sleep. So we never made anyone get up in Anaheim when I was there. So again, now you sleep, 9, 10, whatever needs to happen. You wake up, you do your, finish off your checkouts or replenish or whatever needs to happen, clean the rig, and now your relief comes in. You get to go home without becoming a smear on the side of the freeway because you're so sleep deprived. And then, they have the same routine, but it's instead of breakfast, it's lunch. They come in, they check out their gear, and then they sit down as a crew for lunch instead. So it makes perfect sense to me. And I've always said the trifecta, if we want to change the fire service, for the amplify the good, is the 24/72 has to be the first thing, because hours are hours, simple mathematics. Then a noon or 11 a.m. noon start time, and then an integrated telehealth style system with your dispatch where they take away the non-emergent calls that goes through telehealth. That person gets the help they need. They never have to go to hospital in the first place. An ER bed stays open. Oh, you do? So let's talk about that very quickly, because I think that's the third prong for this trifecta of revolutionizing the fire service.
Yep. So we call it the nurse triage line. It's something that Chief Dean brought from Seattle, an idea that I don't think they actually had it, but it was an idea that they had. And our former chief of staff, Amy Morrow, latched onto it and pushed it immensely. And it's awesome. I mean, I want to say, again, I don't know, but I want to say 80 to 100 calls a day, I believe, are diverted from EMS to the nurse triage line. So the call taker asks certain questions. If the criteria meets certain criteria is met, they get transferred to a nurse. Right? There's just a pocket of nurses somewhere in some other state. It changes on occasion, and that nurse asks them a bunch of questions. If they meet all that criteria, they have the ability to say, okay, well, I'm going to set you up with an appointment at, this freaking wellness clinic right down the street at 1 o'clock. An Uber's going to come. They're going to pick you up. They're going to take you down there, the whole nine. That has been amazing. Another thing that we have done is we have contracted with AMR as a third party provider, and we basically are all but out of the BLS transport game now. If we're taking somebody in a BLS DC unit, AMR either doesn't have any units available or they're so far away that, it just doesn't make sense to wait for them. But back in the day when I was riding an ambulance, I was just talking about this the other day at 9 Engine because I was a fireman at Truck 9. And myself and my old ambulance partner were talking about the difference. We're like, man, we used to transport 15 or 18 people a day. That was transports. That wasn't including the people we got canceled on or got signed refusals for. Nowadays, most units are transporting 2 or 3 when it comes to the BLS unit. And that's huge. It makes a big difference. You actually see the guys in the firehouse. They can drill, they can eat with the crew, they can do all of those things. Oh, and they're still available for immediate response if they're needed. So great kudos to Washington, D.C. Fire Department for thinking well outside the box and leading the charge on some of these things, because our men and women in the street are definitely better off because of it, and the citizens and residents and visitors to the city are definitely better off because of it, because units are available more often than ever before.
Well, I'm sure as you've just detailed, DC probably has a phenomenal, list as far as recruits, in the first place. But I think you're going to have, a few more applicants after listening to this conversation. So, with that being said, if people want to learn more about you, reach out to you, where are the best places online or social media?
Join DCBravest.com. It is a recruitment webpage that a good friend of mine stood up couple of years ago. And well, actually, two good friends of mine. They studied with me. I've coached football with one of them. Awesome people. And we completely reimagined the way that we do our hiring too. It used to be one test every 3 or 4 years. Now it's a new test every 6 months. It used to be you had to stand in line forever. Now everything's done online, including your testing. And hey, if I didn't do well this time, 6 months from now, I can have another shot at it. We also began charging for our testing, which has helped a little bit, if in the craziest of ways. Um, it's $60 or something like that, but at least it makes someone have some skin in the game and really want to do something. Um, I- JoinDCBravest.com is great for the recruitment side of it, for just staying in touch with it. DC Fire and EMS on either Twitter or Facebook are great. We have an entire community and relations division. That right now we have a uniformed battalion fire chief over it just until we find a new division leader for that, and then it'll go back to all civilian staff. But each of those have previous experience with news networks. One of them worked for CNN, another one worked for Fox 5, I believe another one worked for NBC4. But they're amazing at communicating what our men and women are doing in the streets. There's a lot of action shots, a lot of fire department things. And then the last one is I'm going to give a shout out to a good friend of mine. He is my boss. He is the assistant chief of operations. Oddly enough, how the fire service works, there was a time when I was his lieutenant, when he was a wagon driver. But he is one of the best minds in the entire fire service. And I'm not saying that just because he is my boss. I'm saying that because he truly does. And that's Tony Kelleher. If you follow Tony on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, like, you will be 100% up to date. He has been in that role now for 2 years, and I think he has completely revolutionized the way we look at the operations chief. He has done a wonderful job of championing what our men and women are doing out there in the streets. He's done a wonderful job of instilling the mindset of making a decision and sticking by that decision, for better or worse. We've gotten away from chastising members and doing things like that. We've moved more towards like a coaching, mentorship style of leadership on the whole. And again, I mean, he's just information galore. And the dude knows more about the fire service than anybody I've ever met. I mean, this man, honestly, I'll tell you a quick story. It'll make your viewers laugh. Back in the day when I was lieutenant at 4 Engine and he was my wagon driver, Elliot walked in. Now, Elliot's somebody we buy our shirts from. He used to work at Communications Forever. Just an awesome, awesome guy, still hangs around the fire department. Well, he was talking about how that night Chicago Fire was on. And I was like, man, I can't get into that stuff, blah, blah, blah. I don't watch fire movies or fire shows or whatever. Well, Tony pipes up, standing at the stove. You know what I hate about Chicago Fire? Is Rescue 3 closed its doors and blah, 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 blah. And he goes off on like this 10-minute tangent about Chicago Fire. And I just shook my head. I said, Tony, I finally figured you out. And he's like, what? I was like, you really don't know all this stuff. It's just we're so ignorant. We believe everything that comes out of your mouth, So he laughed, and no, truly he does. He's amazing. So if your followers want to know exactly what's going on in DC Fire Department, those three things: stay up, stay current with everything that we're doing.
Brilliant. See, sounds like Tony will be another guest I probably need to get on here as well.
He should have been the first one on my mind. Yes, Tony would be amazing. And Tony can bring, like me, he can bring the volunteer aspect of it, but to another level. He was the fire chief at Kentland for 8 years. Kentland's year in and year out the busiest volunteer fire department in the nation. So being the fire chief there for 8 years, being a co-founder of Traditions Training, I mean, he does a lot in the fire service.
Fantastic. Well, Shawn, I want to thank you so much. I know we've gone over 2 hours, and I could talk to you for another 2 hours. I mean, all the innovations, the great leadership, the culture that's been developed, the work week. I mean, all the things that we've talked about. I think hopefully it'll give people listening a lot of hope. There has been a breakdown in a lot of departments when it comes to that, and I'm an incurable optimist. I know that we can go back to all departments having people just lining up around the building, vying for those coveted spots to wear that particular uniform. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call.